Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. It is the final Q&A of the year, so December Q&A, and I think this is probably the third or fourth one we've actually done in person for the whole year.
Yeah, because we did it last month, but then it wasn't I think like it was February or something like that.
Before then. So kind of crazy. We did more than half of the Q&As with Monitor Steve, but of course he is no more. And yeah, December. So a lot of really good questions. There'll be a 3-part series. I'm not sure if we'll squeeze all of them into this month because we've had a lot of stuff happen. I think we'll get at least 2 in.
I think we're getting all of them in, but I think we'll be taking a little bit easier throughout the rest of the year. I think it's fair to say it's been a really overwhelming past couple of months. So I think both of us need a bit of a break and reset for 2021.
I was going to say, it's been a crazy year for everyone, but it's been a crazy end of year for us. But anyway, enough about that. You guys have questions, we have answers, so let's get to it. Today's Q&A is sponsored by Corsair and their new Dominator Platinum RGB DDR4 memory available in white. That's right, the Dominator Platinum memory is now available in white, but if that's not unique enough for you, allowing you to further customize the memory are a dozen ultra bright, individually addressable X RGB LEDs mounted in the top of the modules. Corsair also has a wide range of kits available, including 16, 32, 64, and even 128GB capacities, with speeds ranging from 3200 to 4800 MHz. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, first one here. Are SSD heat shields on motherboards generally just there for marketing, not just the MSI one that you measured, which increased temperatures by 4 degrees Celsius? So that was, that was a long time ago. Good on you for remembering that review. It was probably the last time I actually reviewed a motherboard. It was an MSI. I think it was a Z170 board, maybe. Anyway, quite some time ago, basically the little SSD thing, if you put it on the SSD, it actually made the SSD run hotter. It was like a heat trap, a heat shield type deal. Obviously, it's going to vary from board to board, and I have to admit, it's not something I've really looked into since. They certainly look like they've improved since that model, which was just a little sort of aluminium flap that went over the SSD. They're actually proper heat spreaders and things now with good thermal pads and all that sort of stuff. So I'd say they work pretty well, but yeah, not really an expert on SSD cooling. It's not something that we've really looked into too much, but they've certainly improved. Probably, depending on the board, bit of marketing, bit of actually usefulness there. But yeah, probably something that would be interesting to look at. Get an SSD and test them all out and see how they work. Chuck a thermocouple on there. Perhaps a video for the future. All right, next question here. When do you think sub $250 graphics cards will launch, and will their prices and availability be compelling? Well, if they're $250, it's more the performance that will make that price point compelling. But I'll obviously, based on what we've seen at the higher price points, it seems very likely that the $250 cards will represent very excellent value and be something you'll probably want to upgrade to if you've got, especially something like a GTX 1060, the RX 480, 580 finally might be getting replaced. As for when, I would think a few months into next year.
Yeah, I think some of the rumors are sort of talking about a few more graphics card releases in the early part of next year, so your January and February timeframe. Not sure whether those will necessarily be $250 because Nvidia's only gone down to $400. So there's probably one more release before we get to the $250 price.
Yes.
To sort of there's
probably a 3060 that'll land at $300-ish.
Yeah, $300, $350, who knows? And then the next release after that. So they probably will be coming, and like you've sort of been talking about, I would expect them to be definitely worth an upgrade when it comes to that. As for availability, I think, at least I'm hoping that by the time these products are available and go on sale, that a lot of the demand for new GPUs will have died down a little bit. Like all the people that want to buy high-end GPUs and upgrade to those things have already been tempted across and have hopefully been able to buy the products that they wanted. So hopefully there won't be as much of the availability crunch, and hopefully supply on wafers and that will be a bit better. Yeah,
there still kind of will be, because obviously people are interested in a $250 graphics card, which, let's be clear about this, that is the majority of people who will be buying a next-gen card. They won't have bought a $400, $500, $600 cards. They'll be waiting, which is why we're getting so many questions about the $200 to $250 price point. So there'll be a huge amount of demand. You can expect for sure they will sell out.
Oh,
on
they'll
day
definitely
one.
sell out. I think.
But as you're saying, how quickly will they be replenished? And
Yeah.
I still think it's going to be like a month situation.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, that's obviously a lot better than what we've got right now. But yeah, I'd be... Usually with those lower end cards, at least in that price range, we see more supply because they make... either the die is smaller so they can make more dies per wafer, or they're cutting down from some larger design, so there's a lot of wasted silicon that they can put into these products. So generally those cards are a bit better in terms of availability after a month or so compared to some of the high-end stuff. But
yeah, these will be smaller dies, as you're saying, many more dies per wafer, so that will help immensely.
Yep. Next question is, what monitor do you guys personally use for gaming? I've mentioned a few times on the channel that I'm an ultra-wide gamer, so I do have my LG 34GK 650F that I'm currently... No, hang on, that's wrong. Wrong model name. It's a 34GK 950F, that's right. Got to get those names right. Even I get confused by
If Tim can't get his monitor model name right, what hope do I have?
Oh, yeah, they're shocking.
I don't even know what I've got. You would have more chance of knowing which one I'm using at the moment.
Yeah, that's a 3440 by 1440 IPS panel, 144 hertz, and yeah, use it for both video editing and gaming, and it's been pretty good. Are you still using a 4K 60 hertz monitor for gaming?
Well, I was... So about 2 years ago, so shortly after you came on board the channel, I did have a separate gaming PC. But then it just, with, as you've seen, my limited area for testing, which will be resolved shortly, I ended up getting rid of my gaming system because it was just taking up too much room. Because once we started doing VRM thermal testing and all these extra things, I had that many test systems and things everywhere all the time that I didn't have the real estate available to have an office editing type PC and a gaming PC. So the gaming PC went. I was using the Acer Predator. So 27-inch 144 hertz 4K panel. That's collecting dust at the moment. And I have a 32-inch IPS panel, 4K. ViewSonic.
Yeah, you have the ViewSonic, like the professional.
Yeah, what's the model number? Come on, Tim.
Oh, God. No.
I knew you wouldn't remember. You reviewed
I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Many years ago.
There's only so much space in my brain for the monitor names. Like, it fills up quickly when you have to remember so many numbers.
After a year, you archive them.
Yeah.
But anyway, hopefully early next year, I'll have a brand new studio with tons and tons of room, and I will build a dedicated gaming PC, high refresh rate monitor, and all that stuff. So that'll be good. And then I'll probably use whatever Tim recommends, to be honest. Okay, next question here. Has Radeon, or I suppose AMD, told you guys when we can expect their super resolution feature to be introduced? So DLSS competitor.
Yeah. Well, the simple answer to this is no. So
they've hinted.
All right, next question.
Well, they have hinted very strongly that it's coming, and they hope it to be very good.
Yes, I think they're still working. By the sounds of it, it's not complete yet, so they haven't actually finalized it. So, judging by the way AMD releases these sort of things, if it doesn't make it into their like end of year driver update, then we're probably, which is obviously not going to happen at this point, then I'd probably say the next gen of GPUs. It depends how quickly they get it out. I mean, if we see another refresh like next year, then I'd say that's probably when they'd target it. But it sounds still like it's a fair way away. Like, I wouldn't be banking on this coming in the next couple of months. They could surprise, but it sounded very much like a footnote at the end of the presentation. Like, hey guys, we're working on this. We're not ready to talk about it yet. It's coming, but...
Yeah, before the 6800 series announcement, they sort of made it, at least to me in private conversations, sound like it was coming sooner than what it may ultimately be coming. So anyway, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
All right, given all the CPUs and GPUs that have been released so far, what combination of CPU, GPU would be the most bang for buck? Feel free to look into your crystal ball and comment on upcoming CPUs and GPUs too. Well, that last bit actually makes it a bit easier because there's been... For sort of bang for your buck, I guess we're talking gaming here. There's nothing really Zen 3 related, I think, that's a great bang for your buck because like even like a 5900X is kind of overkill for gaming. You don't need a high IPC, high performance 12 core, 24 thread CPU. So it's not a good bang for your buck for just gaming, despite the fact that it is a great CPU. I think bang for your buck gaming CPU is more like what I imagine or hope a Ryzen 5 5600 at the rumored $220 US would be. So if that CPU is a thing at that price, that would be the ultimate bang for your buck for gaming and just general PC usage. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it really hasn't been a good year for bang for buck releases. It's been
like
all high-end stuff, really. Like
if you're going off current CPUs, it's like Ryzen 5 3600 or the Core i5 10400F.
Yep, that's right.
They're like, because the Ryzen 5 3600, last I looked about a week ago, that looks like it's gone back up to MSRP or just above. So it's like, because that was down around 160, 170 at a point there. It's back up over 200, at least it was on Newegg. Whereas the 400F is down around the 170 mark, which makes that actually a really good buy right now.
Yep.
So we're in a bit of a weird spot in the market. So it's kind of like, those CPUs are your best bang for the buck of what's available now. So if you're building a bang for your buck system right now, it's probably going to be like an Intel Core i5 10400F, but I'll have to look into that. There might be something that we could do a video on. As for GPUs, there's like nothing available right now because you've got, like, really you'd say RTX 3060 Ti at $400 US. That's kind of your best bang for the buck. You wouldn't buy like a 5700 series GPU anymore.
You wouldn't buy any, like in my opinion, it's not worth buying any last gen GPUs because they're going to be replaced within 6 months with a much better cost per frame and much better performing card for that money.
So right now it's your 3060 Ti. In the near future, it could be something like a 6700 series card from AMD or RTX 3060.
There's just not GPUs in that space yet.
It's so hard to say.
Like the 3060 Ti is kind of getting there, but there's no competition, so it's hard to say, like, is that the best that's going to happen in the next couple of months?
Yeah, it's certainly a good value product, and I don't think you'd be disappointed with it. But in a few months there may be something that's better value. But maybe AMD will come with and just offer an alternative that isn't necessarily flat out better.
Where you can really make the comments on bang for buck is when the entire lineup is out. Like when you can say, okay, we've got GPUs from $150 through to $1,000. Now we know this point is kind of the optimal point. And for some generations, that's been lower. Like it's been more around the $200 mark. For the past couple of generations, it's been more like $300 to $400 where it's really good.
It's exactly why we haven't done a top 5 best CPU or GPU update. I've had tons and tons of people. I think my last top 5 GPU video has over 1 million views now. People have been asking for an update. And it's like, it doesn't make sense to do one right now. So I'm not going to do one just for the views. We want to make content that's actually useful. So that means that that's probably going to happen early next year. Hopefully, maybe. We'll see.
Yep.
All right. A question here that seems like something we could probably have a discussion about for a very long period of time, but we'll do our best to get through this one quickly. Considering AMD's overall higher rasterization performance and much higher VRAM buffers when compared to their NVIDIA counterparts, do you think that their ray tracing performance could overtake NVIDIA's once they get everything sorted out and optimized, potentially with a super resolution feature coming in the future? Well, we just spoke of the super resolution stuff, and we don't know when in the future that's coming, whether it'll be with a refresh or it'll just come up out of the blue or a whole new next generation thing. And then there's also game support and things like that that have to come along. So it could be quite some time before that's really something viable. And I guess in some ways you could say the same about DLSS, really, because it is still... The game support is still rather limited, although very impressive in the games where it is featured. But yeah, and I guess ray tracing as well, it's a really tough one to talk about because we haven't really seen yet, I don't feel, what the RDNA 2 ray tracing performance is really like. There's not too many titles where we can really compare NVIDIA and AMD evenly, I would say. Would you agree with that at this point in time?
Yeah, I think all the games that have come out so far, at least the majority of them, have been built with NVIDIA's ray tracing solution in mind. As we've talked about in previous Q&As, the way, and well, not necessarily the way, but the things that AMD and NVIDIA are accelerating as part of the ray tracing, the way ray tracing is done, is very different. So if you're making a game that is designed for NVIDIA's ray tracing solution, as we've sort of seen, because AMD's accelerating a sort of a different part of the ray tracing structure a bit differently, there's no guarantee that that ray tracing implementation is going to transfer over particularly well. So again, we kind of have to wait and see on that one as to when we get maybe, your big titles at the end of 2021, when we see, obviously there's going to be more ray trace games throughout 2021 because the consoles now have it. So over time, you'd think that, a year of AMD's ray tracing solution being out, we'll get a much better idea of what's going on. And certainly I'd say that some of the, particularly the really early ray trace games on Nvidia are probably not that representative. But at the same time, this question says, do you think their performance could overtake Nvidia's once they get everything sorted out and optimized? And to me, that sounds pretty optimistic. I think with the way that we've seen sort of the gap in ray tracing performance right now, we're talking about there's quite a bit of ground to make up there. And I don't think that games will be able to close that gap entirely, but it's just a matter of how much they'll be able to.
I think here we are talking about ray tracing again, where we're inevitably going to get into trouble. My take on RDNA 2's ray tracing support is kind of similar to the situation with Turing, where it works, but it's more of a tech demo.
Yeah.
That's sort of my take on it. I guess the difference is AMD hasn't heavily pushed the ray tracing support as a key selling point or a reason to charge a premium for the cards. It's just, look, we kind of do this now, but they do it kind of as well as Turing, whereas Ampere has taken the Turing thing a little bit further, sort of brute forcing it by the fact that the cards are more powerful. Yes, they've optimized the RT cores and all that sort of stuff, but you're not getting... There's always that bottleneck there of how powerful the GPU is overall. And I guess the whole conversation with ray tracing, it's still very confusing and where we stand on it and stuff. But, we did that poll recently where how many FPS do you deem as acceptable in a game like Cyberpunk? And the minimum for the vast majority of people was 60 or better. So that kind of tells you everything you need to know about ray tracing, because with most cards, there's not too many situations where you're getting a visually enhanced, experience, but also achieving 60 FPS or better. So I think for most of you, ray tracing really is still, for the most part, a tech demo where you turn it on. And a game like Cyberpunk 2077, it looks quite good. But unless you've got like a 3080 or a 3090, I don't know how many of you would actually play with it enabled. So taking like the 6800 and the 3070, for example, how much ray tracing really comes into that equation for which one of those you should buy is hard to say. And I'm also just the rasterization performance. I don't think AMD is overall higher. Again, it depends on the game, the resolution. Yeah, they have come out overall on top in our 18 game average at 1080p and 1440p, but it's also so close that it doesn't really matter. So we're not saying definitely buy a Radeon RX 6800 because it definitely has better rasterization performance. That's certainly not the case either. And we don't think that AMD's ray tracing performance is going to come on in leaps and bounds where...
I highlight that. I think the one thing, if anything, that we're going to see from optimization is no more of those games like Minecraft or Control where
breaks it completely,
where there's kind of either the implementation is just flat out broken or the performance is so far behind that it's ridiculous. I think we're not going to see that many things when we talk about optimization and how AMD can improve ray tracing. I think solving those things is what we'll see. I don't think we'll see a situation where like a 6800 XT is matching a 3080 like it does in rasterization, because it does sound like the overall ray tracing performance, raw performance, is lower on that card. So, but again, like I said, like we've said overall this time, there's so much to play out here that it's really hard to make any conclusions on this stuff based on what we know now. And I know there's some people that want us to jump to conclusions and sort of make bold statements and base our predictions of the future on what we have now, but it's just such a new thing. Like, we've been talking about it being practically a tech demo for 2 years it's going to take time.
I'm glad you actually brought that up, because last month we had a few people having a go at us for talking at both sides of our mouth, saying we don't want to predict the future, but also the VRAM is going to be better for the future. That's not what you were really saying, although that is essentially what we believe. But you're saying we have evidence now that 8 gigabytes of VRAM is on the edge in some instances. And we just got a recent example with Cyberpunk. You enable ray tracing in Cyberpunk, you exceed the VRAM buffer. The 3070 should be similar in terms of performance to the 2080 Ti, but because the 2080 Ti has 11 gigabytes of VRAM and the 3070 only has 8 gigabytes, and enabling ray tracing calls for more than 8 gigabytes, you see the 3070 fall away from the 2080 Ti. So we're seeing that now in late 2020. What are we going to see in late 2021, 2022? Probably a lot more of that. So we have evidence now that 16 gigabytes of VRAM will be beneficial and allow the 6800 to perform better in the future. I think there's a high probability that we'll be proven right on that one. But we'll say we told you so in 1 or 2 years if we're right. And if we're wrong, well, that sucks.
It seems like with these GPU reviews, and this is just to continue talking about this, but it seems with GPU reviews that there's so much more going on these days than it was a couple of years ago. Like it's no longer just a discussion about performance, because especially with these generations, because the performance is so close. It's really about, do you prefer, is ray tracing more important to you? Is the VRAM more important to you? Is like Nvidia's encoder, is DLSS more important to you? Is 1080p gaming or 4K gaming more important to you? There's so many different things when it comes to a recommendation that makes it very, very difficult to sort of make bold claims. And I think, like you were saying with the VRAM thing, that's more provable now as to being an issue, is the ray tracing thing. As we've continued to say repeatedly, there's a lot to play out there that there's a lot of uncertainty that makes it hard to make bold claims.
And with this time in 2 years, I think it's pretty comfortable to say that something like a 3070 is not going to be taking full advantage of ray tracing in the big blockbuster 2022 game. But the ability to run that game on ultra with maximum textures because you have the VRAM there to do it will enhance the visuals anyway. So if we get to whatever the equivalent, I mean, we probably won't have an equivalent of Cyberpunk 2077 in 2 years' time, but whatever the big blockbuster game is in 2 years' time, I doubt you'll be playing that with the maximum texture size, which really does enhance the visuals significantly on a 3070, whereas I think the 6800 will do it just fine. So that's where I'm coming from there.
And I think it's fair to say that both GPU brands for this generation have made compromises in one way or another for future gaming. And with AMD, it's ray tracing. They're making a bet that VRAM is more important than ray tracing, so they focused their sort of how much money they can spend on their product on giving you 16 gigabytes of VRAM, whereas Nvidia's gone the other way and said that ray tracing is going to be more important and the VRAM is where we're going to sacrifice. And there's lots to play out to figure out. There's going to be lots of comparisons that you'll have to make over the next 2 years as to which of those approaches is
I think
is
in
better.
2 years it'll be very clear in 2 years' time based on my experience with what we've seen previously. But anyway, that'll be a fun thing to revisit, as you say. We should probably move on to the next question at this point. What is the most irritating consumer trend regarding commonly bought and or recommended PC hardware? For example, something commonly claimed to be a real important thing for general performance, but in reality is a relatively minor consideration. Most irritating sort of I guess it's kind of annoying when and I guess this is where we get taken out of context from time to time as well, when people sort of look at things through their lens and apply that to everybody, it's difficult not to do that, I suppose. And people are concerned about their own situation and not other people's situations. But I guess that, heavy generalizations about how many cores you need for gaming or how much RAM you need or how much GPU horsepower you need and stuff like that. I suppose that's kind of annoying because everyone has different budgets, different standards, different requirements. They're playing different types of games that use resources differently. So it's very hard to generalize on that sort of stuff. And that's generally why we run polls where we get really good data from you guys about how many frames you're targeting. So we know that people watching our video, they typically want a minimum of 60 FPS. You're not happy with 40 FPS. You're absolutely not happy with a console like 30 FPS. You very much want 60 FPS or better. So it doesn't really matter what game we're reviewing, whether it's like a Fortnite type game or an Assassin's Creed type game. We're always going for that 60 FPS because that seems like that's what the bulk of you want to see. So we make our sort of generalizations and recommendations based on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think people as well get annoyed with reviews when we sort of do both things. Like, for example, talk about our preferences and how we would do it, in addition to providing the more generalized thing. And I think sometimes people, when watching the reviews, only hear one or the other thing that fits more with their alignment. So, for example, if the generalized thing, like one great example is with Cyberpunk, you've been talking about how you would prefer to play it at 90 FPS, but we know our general audience is happy with 60 FPS as the minimum. We would tend to offer both of those perspectives in the review because it just makes it more interesting. I talking about in my, for example, Tiger Lake laptop reviews, I basically said I would probably choose Tiger Lake for my personal use cases because I don't use laptops for heavy work, but I could understand someone, in a more general use case, AMD does have advantages in other workloads that may benefit you. So
it's what we always say, it depends.
It depends.
So we try not to, go with a narrow lens. So, other examples are what CPU is better, not even necessarily the core count, like go back to Zen 2 versus Coffee Lake, like which one should you buy? And again, it depends. Like if you're playing a game like CSGO, actually that might not be a good example because that played quite well on Zen 2, but what's a game that requires high frame rates that didn't play that well on Zen 2?
Like Rocket League.
Yeah. Well, let's just say an esports title that requires a lot of frames, and then therefore those sort of gamers, you're probably better off with Intel there. But then for everyone else, where you're mostly GPU bound, AMD makes more sense for a whole host of reasons that we will have explained in our videos. So we're not really saying always buy this or always buy that. We're trying to explain the different use cases for why one may be better than the other. And as Tim says, I think some people only hear one thing and they think we're only recommending that one thing when we're trying to clearly explain.
Yeah, just provide a generalized conclusion. I think the other thing that really irritates me, this is very different to what we've just been talking about commonly bought hardware and stuff, is people just buying based directly on spec sheets. Like,
so that'd be a monitor thing more,
but monitors is a big thing, I think, with something like HDR, for example.
Sure.
Like, so many monitors really do not support HDR, and you see people getting burnt when they buy an HDR monitor, turn on HDR, and they realize that it looks worse than SDR. So that irritates me, but it's more than just that. It's so many, like, just marketing things being put forward as being important. Like, when you look at motherboards and stuff, the amount of BS that's in some of the marketing materials for motherboards is just crazy.
Yeah, I guess that annoys you not so much about the individual, more that they've been taken advantage of by marketing.
Yeah, so like when people recommend stuff based more on spec sheets than on actual testing of those products. Like, for example, like monitors, recommending something because it's got HDR support doesn't actually mean that it's good, or has 1 millisecond response time. It doesn't mean that that's actually how it performs, that it's good. And similar with, let's say, a motherboard, you might have like an 8-phase VRM or something, but it turns out they've used the worst possible 8-phase design, or it's not even 8 actual phases.
Yeah.
So, we've seen this many, many times, and you can even think back to very early days of like people getting into PC gaming, where you'd look at a GPU and you'd make your decision based on stuff like VRAM, because that's the only spec that made any sense on the box, or like a clock speed or something, and ignoring the rest of the picture. So I think that irritates me a bit, but yeah, it just takes reviews, I guess, to cut through that.
Yep. Besides just taking AMD and Nvidia's word for it, is there any more concrete evidence to suggest that we will be seeing adequate supply of RX 6000 series and RTX 30 series graphics cards within the next 4 to 6 weeks? Are the bottlenecks that the root causes for these supply shortages really being fixed fast enough to meet this timeline? What do you feel the chances are that we will still be facing severe supply shortages as we enter spring or summer of 2021? Impossible to say, really.
Yeah, it's been interesting looking at the local market, because I guess this is just one small thing, but in Australia right now, to retail like PC case gear, there are some RTX 30 series GPUs that are in stock and available to buy. I just checked this morning, actually, and there was, I think, a few 3070s and a few 3090s available.
Yep.
But then you look at the US on Newegg and everything is still out of stock. And obviously on the AMD side, there's no stock available of those products. So as we've sort of been saying for a couple, once it was clear that we were having these supply issues, we were sort of flagging the sort of January, February, let's get past Christmas to sort of see once the demand from Christmas dies down a little bit, once the consoles start shipping through in a serious amount, then we'll hopefully start to see these supply shortages being fixed. So when it comes to like, what are the root causes of these supply shortages? And it's things like 7 nanometer wafer supply is non-existent. And there's been rumors about GDDR6 memory as well being in short supply because consoles using 16 gigabytes of that. So hopefully, once they're sort of front-ended some of those console manufacturing for the big holiday period and we start getting more into normal sales for a product like that.
I think by late January, we'll have a much better idea.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, is there any concrete evidence? There's no concrete evidence, I would say, but there's still... Nothing has really changed in the other direction either to suggest that it's going to get worse or that it's not going to recover slowly over time. So I think by the time we are entering spring or summer, which I'm guessing you mean the US spring and summer, which for us would be autumn and winter, hopefully you'll be able to buy some GPUs around that time. If not, we're in a serious crisis.
All right, next one here. Given the short attention span of consumers in general, do you believe that Nvidia's actions will be largely forgotten in the new year? Also, is there anything we should be doing as consumers to hold tech companies accountable for, to put it mildly, poor behavior and/or misleading marketing? I think for the first part of that question, I don't think Nvidia is going to be too quick to forget this one or sort of customers. Well, I guess hard to say because how many Nvidia customers were really made aware of the situation, but it did blow up to be a really big story. So
I think it's a situation where people are going to forget the sort of the immediacy of the story and sort of people are going to move on to the next thing, as always happens. There's going to be the next thing and the next thing, and people are going to move on and stop focusing all their energy on this.
Yep.
But it certainly will have damaged their reputation, and people will bring this up over time. I was going to say, I think for quite some time.
I think that's where it'll be most damaging to them. Will be if they do anything similar to this again in the future. This will all get dug up very quickly.
Yeah,
because there's videos of it. There's plenty of evidence. There's plenty of things for people to point to. In the past, things get swept under the rug or forgotten because there's not a whole lot of evidence or a whole lot of a discussion around whatever happened. But I think because there was so much this time, it'll resurface very quickly.
Yeah, it's going to be lingering under the surface of the community for a while, and whenever there is another issue involving Nvidia, I would expect that like people bring up the GPP still quite a bit whenever that it's not something that's constantly brought up and it's not something that's on the forefront of everyone's mind all the time, but whenever there's just that little thing that is a trigger for bringing up a company's past indiscretions, this will be part of it.
Yeah, the GPP was obviously a big thing, but there wasn't any... I mean... We know it was a thing. We know it definitely happened because we saw, I think it was ASUS and MSI both started rebranding their AMD cards. So that's exactly what was proposed to happen.
So there was definitely some strong suggestions.
So we saw evidence of it happening, but we never saw evidence in writing from an Nvidia employee that, we never saw the contract. I don't think that was ever leaked, was it? So I think Kyle from HUD OCP saw the contract but never leaked it. I think that's the story. Anyway, there was never any hard evidence that the program really existed, but it was quite clear that it did, whereas this is quite different. So, I think it'll be something that will definitely resurface very quickly if anything like this happens again, which hopefully doesn't, because we would like to move on from it and never have to talk about it again. That would be ideal.
Yeah.
And then for the second part of the question, I mean, you guys vote with your wallets, but you're not a single entity. So there's really nothing you can do because there'll always be people that will buy, the 3090 exists because there's always people that will buy cards that make absolutely no sense. And we don't have a problem with Nvidia offering cards for those people. So, the 3090 is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it. We think it's a silly product that shouldn't exist. But just because we think that doesn't mean that it is a silly product that shouldn't exist because clearly they're making a lot of money off it. So therefore it should exist from their perspective.
Yeah. My opinion on this is sort of, I don't think many people should go out and buy an inferior product because of this.
Yeah.
So, for example, I wouldn't be advocating, let's say, buying a 6900 XT over a 3090 if you're interested in a high-end product because of this. I still think...
Well, it was never going to change our recommendation anyway.
You should still be spending your money on the product that makes the most sense for you. And obviously this may be a consideration for you, but I still encourage people to spend their money on the better products. I think that makes the most sense. But I think when it comes to keeping companies accountable, I think part of that is just supporting independent reviews and independent testing. Because by supporting channels like us, Gamers Nexus, and all the other channels that you're aware of that do thorough, in-depth, independent testing and keep companies accountable, this is going to give you the information that you need to make accurate buying decisions. So by helping the whole industry and helping sort of the review process and supporting channels like us, and that doesn't necessarily mean financial support. It means doing your research, reading multiple reviews, getting good opinions, not being sucked in by marketing. By becoming an informed consumer, you are going to be able to hold a company accountable for misleading marketing because you're not going to buy into it. You're going to be informed. And when you're informed, that cuts through BS. It cuts through false claims and all that sort of thing. So that really is the best way to hold companies accountable. Be informed, buy products based on hard data and facts and evidence and testing from us independent reviewers and all that sort of thing. And then, that'll help out because then the strong products survive in the market and the weak products die away. Yeah,
I think a good way to summarize it is that we don't want people buying an inferior product just because that company has done something that's not great for us, or they've tried to hurt us in some way, because we don't want to stoop to that. If they're making a great product, then they're making a great product. The best thing you can do is what we saw in this exact situation, where it was great to see the real big guys in the industry like Linus and Jay, step in and do a great thing there. But also that alone, nearly threw my phone in, that alone wouldn't have had the impact it had without all of you offering support as well and jumping on board. So the support we saw from viewers on that was just huge.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, all that stuff really helps. And it's unfortunate that there's no one thing that we can really say that, you as an individual are going to have like massive amounts of power to sort of combat companies. But I just think that, continuing to be informed and supporting the independent testing process really helps these companies not be able to get away with this stuff as much. Of course, it's on us to continue being fair and give all companies a fair go, because you don't want to suddenly see everyone in the tech media like jumping on board rubbish things or prioritizing one company over another. So we have to do our part as well. But that just helps.
We've had a lot of questions from viewers as well in this Q&A series where we could have clickbaited the videos with more of the stuff that, more of this drama, but we want to put the drama behind us. We genuinely do. We'd like not to have to talk about it anymore. We're hoping that, Nvidia's apologized. We've accepted that apology. We're hoping we can just move on with reviewing their cards and their products as we always have. So that would be ideal for us. So hopefully that's a thing. And we're going to pause there. That's enough answering of questions for part 1. Probably went for half an hour or so, they tend to. So a couple of long ones here, short ones there. But anyway, so part 1 done. Part 2 should be on the channel tomorrow. Apart from that, thanks heaps for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.